Mavericks owner Mark Cuban on CNBC yesterday talking about the inherent differences between basketball in a bubble and the NFL in 32 individual bubbles spread throughout the country where the virus is currently raging, especially in multiple areas where multiple teams are located. Look, Chris, it's all obvious. You got more players, you got more people. It is going to be harder to manage. It would have been impossible to do a one-location bubble for the NFL for 5 months. It would have been impossible. They would have had to commission a location at Area 51, buy one of the Hawaiian Islands.
Right.
They would have had to have done something because the more guys you have, the harder it is to keep everybody inside.
Yes.
And all it takes is one guy who sneaks out, gets the virus, and brings it back in, and you have a potential outbreak. It's too many people. It would have been way too expensive.
Yes.
And the risk would not have been driven down to close to zero like it has been for the NBA.
No. And again, I mean, the resources wouldn't be there. And I mean, unless you're right, maybe they could take over a city, and I would be like, even within that, I'm not sure that you can pull it off, like a full city. Football fields are bigger than basketball courts. Sorry. Yeah, you can go into the Disney Wild World of Sports. I've done training camp there when I played for the Buccaneers. It's 10 basketball courts under one roof, and then another building with other basketball courts not far from that. So, that would be a real issue. I don't know how you could actually pull that off. I don't. Maybe they could have pulled off the one thing I thought for maybe divisional. Bubbles is one thing I thought about a ways back, like if you had an NFC West bubble or an AFC West bubble. But I think the NFL is doing the best thing they can possibly do here. And again, it's just too much resources altogether. NFL teams need many meeting rooms. It's not, the NBA can just go get away with one room, maybe two, and they're fine. It's just a totally different sport that way. And yes, there's more of a juggling act. And, that's why it's interesting. Like, I remember, I think back in the spring with like John Harbaugh and the Ravens, weren't they tossing around the idea of maybe they wanted to go with a little bit of a smaller roster to not juggle around as many people? That'll be something to be watch out for. I mean, these coaches are going to have to get creative here during training camp to get the best out of their teams.
And that still hasn't been determined, the size of the rosters for training camp. NFLPA leadership had been pushing for 80. I was told, though, the rank and file wants 90 because why have 320 guys out of work before we've even shown up for a single training camp practice? So that hasn't been mentioned. A lot of these issues that have been percolating that haven't been mentioned recently, it tells me those issues are still unresolved. That's one to keep an eye on. I had heard some teams are actually thinking about voluntarily going with fewer than 90. You don't have to have 90. 90 is the limit, not the minimum. So that's another way to manage the size of your own individual bubble. But, the reality is we've got the basketball players all gathered in Orlando, and they are under tight restrictions to stay put. And they've got an anonymous tip line if anyone is exiting the bubble, basically going AWOL off of base. With the NFL teams, everyone's going to go home at night. And no one's going to know what guys are doing when they go home at night. And I think that's why the teams that have the best veteran leadership, the highest level of accountability, and I can imagine Tom Brady basically checking in via FaceTime with all the young guys on the roster.
Is he the guy you want to give that example to? It didn't seem like he cared that much. Let's think of another guy. Because,
I think he is. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
He is great, and I know what you mean because, yes, he'd be the guy that would keep people in check. I understand what you're saying.
Somebody would have the credibility to tell young players what to do, right? So there may be nobody on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster that can pull this off, and they're in Florida. And, that's one inherent difference, too. Because some teams are in locations, Chris,
I know,
where the bars and restaurants aren't shut down. Other teams are in locations where there's really nowhere to go.
Right.
There's really nothing to do. So the prospect of every night studying your playbook, watching game film, playing video games, lather, rinse, repeat, get up and work the next day. I still think that, and we said this yesterday on the question of Chiefs versus the field, the team that's going to be in the best position to thrive this year is the team that loses the fewest number of players to COVID-19 positives and have them off the roster for 1, 2, 3 weeks at a time.
Yeah, and Mike, something that you hit on, back in the spring too, between that and then the teams that had the least amount of moving parts in the offseason, whether that be coaches or free agents. And, that's what's funny. You look at the two teams that went to the Super Bowl, their rosters haven't really changed, so they're really in a good spot. The Baltimore Ravens hasn't really changed. A lot of the top teams, stayed pretty much status quo, and I think that'll give them a little bit of an advantage here going into the 2020 season as compared to a team that's awesome on paper like the Bucs, but we know you need to work and get a little camaraderie and get on the same page as a football team.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.